What does an Orlando Magic team on the precipice of making the NBA playoffs look like? Kind of looks like the team we have now. We'll dive into some history and what it says about the current Magic team on today's episode of Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is July 31st, 2023. My name is Philip Rossreich. I'm the expert and site editor over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Just follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, what an Orlando Magic team on the precipice of a long playoff run looks like and why all those elements are present for the 2024 Orlando Magic. We'll get into some Magic history today on the show. But before we do that, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember this great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The Orlando Magic have had 3 sustained postseason runs in their history. They've had 4 runs of more than 2 years, but when we look at Magic history, and no offense to our beloved Nikola Vucevic teams, when we look at Magic history, there are really 5 eras of Magic history at this point, or 6 eras, I guess. The expansion era, the Shaq era, the T-Mac era, the Dwight era, the rebuild, and now the Paolo Banchero era. 6 eras of Magic basketball. And 3 of them have produced sustained postseason runs of multiple playoffs, runs of at least 2 runs of multiple deep playoff runs. And so we have a bit of history to understand, at least for the Magic, what makes a successful team or what makes a team that's about to hit big. What are the elements that are present for this to happen? This is part of the story. This is part of kind of the process that a team like the Magic is going through. And so I think it's important, to understand where the Magic are currently as a franchise, as an organization, and what potentially lies ahead. We go through this historical study. We go through what the history says, to kind of give us a clue of what's going to happen. Now, obviously, it still has to be about the work. None of this stuff matters if the players don't put in the work. Nothing is guaranteed, and everything's a little bit different. As much as Dwight and Shaq had very similar trajectories, it was all different. So fortunately, we have 3. So we have 3 segments to get through. And so I want to go through each of these teams kind of in turn. So let's start with the Shaq era Magic. The Orlando Magic with Shaquille O'Neal, they had a playoff run from 1994 to 1996. I guess we could say 1997 with Penny Hardaway. Made the playoffs again in 99, which we forget that season ever happened, unless you're the Spurs. The Magic had essentially a 3-4-year playoff run with 1 finals trip and 1 Eastern Conference Finals. But obviously that run started with that 1992-93 season, Shaq's rookie year. And that season was special because it was Shaq. It was the Magic's first time being competitive. Shaq changed everything about this team. You don't need me to tell you about that. If you've watched this Magic moment, if you lived it as an Orlando Magic fan, you know how critical Shaq is to everything about this franchise. It's why after they retire number 25 for Nick Anderson, number 32 should be hanging in the rafters. If the Magic want to do something really special for this 35th anniversary season, getting Nick Anderson up in the rafters would be it. If they want to do something really, really special, getting 25 and 32, as well as probably 1 and the second number 1 up in short order, is an absolute necessity. this Magic franchise does not exist without Shaq in the way that we see it now. The Magic may not even be in Orlando anymore without Shaq, considering some of the struggles that this franchise went through in the late 90s, early 2000s. Shaq was truly a transformative player. And he got the Magic to 41-41 just by his presence in the 1993 season. He changed the whole orientation of this team, brought players into the right roles. Everything changed because of Shaquille O'Neal. And of course, the Magic missed the playoffs in the 1993 season with that 41-41 record, but only on the fourth tiebreaker. It was really tight. It was really close. A fourth tiebreaker, out on the playoffs. Like that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big thing. So of course, you have that happen and you win the lottery the next year. Again, you somehow win the lottery with just one ping pong ball in the hopper. You get Anthony Hardaway. You're in the finals within 2 seasons. I want to make that point too, that getting to the finals, becoming a championship team, it happens really quickly. But first you got to get into the playoffs. And that Magic team with Shaquille O'Neal obviously got into the playoffs. Now, there's a lot of similarities here between what happened with the Magic in 1993, as well as what happened with the Magic before the 2006 season, before the Magic made their playoff run with Dwight Howard. If there's one element that binds all these teams together, it's how much the number one pick changes your franchise. How much having a rookie, how much having a young player on the cusp of superstardom is like a prerequisite to a potential long playoff run. And so if we're looking for what are the elements that create a playoff team or sustained playoff team, that first element is obviously the star player being put in place. Once that star player is in place, everything else just starts to make sense. This is the thing the Magic struggled with most after Dwight Howard departed, and all credit to Nikola Vucevic. Once the Magic put their full force behind him, he was a limited star, but even like embracing him as a team star brought the Magic to the playoffs and got them back-to-back playoff berths, even though Vucevic only had one All-Star season during that playoff run. He was an All-Star again in 2021 when the team was at the bottom of the standings. It is essential that you have a star. And so what Paolo Banchero was able to do his rookie year, not just being the runaway winner for rookie of the year, that's nice, but putting up statistics that place him among the class of like elite superstar players. All that stuff is really, really important. That is a sure sign that the Magic are on the right track, that the Magic are doing the right things, that the Magic do have someone that can anchor their team to not just make the playoffs, but get there repeatedly, over and over and over again. We're going to talk in the next segment about the 2000 Magic, the Heart and Hustle team. But let's be real. Tracy McGrady was the anchor for the playoff teams in 2001, 2002, 2003. The star, you go as far as your star takes you. Obviously, a little bit more than that to win in the playoffs, but a star really changes everything. And we're sitting here today talking about this Orlando Magic team, talking about the potential of making playoffs because we believe the Magic have a star, a true star in Paolo Banchero, someone that can guide this team and push it forward to get to the playoffs, and well beyond. If there is an element that is clear as day, it's that Shaq is just a really, really special player, a once-in-a-generation player that, shouldn't be subject to polls at any point in his career. But having truly unique star players really changes everything. And that is the first element a team needs for a long playoff run. What do we learn, though, from the Heart and Hustle team that set up the Tracy McGrady era? Well, we'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. We want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day. Every day, we are in our off-season schedule this week, so I'm probably still going to post an episode on Tuesday, but guaranteed to have episodes probably Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the time being. I am planning right now an episode on Tuesday because I'm planning to stay up for the U.S. soccer game, so I need something to kind of keep me busy while I'm doing that. But we want to thank you for sticking with Locked On Magic throughout the offseason. We'll be back up and running 5 days a week, guaranteed, or almost guaranteed, once the season gets going at the end of September and early October. We'll talk World Cup plenty as we get into the World Cup schedule later on this month. But what can we learn then from the Heart and Hustle team? The Tracy McGrady era was one of somewhat bitter disappointment because the Magic just didn't take advantage of one of the truly gifted players, a Hall of Fame player in Tracy McGrady. Injuries were a big factor with that in Grant Hill. And obviously, it's hard to draw a straight line between that special Heart and Hustle season of 2000 with the Tracy McGrady era because the Heart and Hustle team in 2000 was essentially built to be deconstructed. It was built to give the Magic maximum cap room. It was built, frankly, to lose. Everyone knew it except the team, except the players in that locker room. And look, they gave us a truly special season. No one would ever take back that 2000 season. It was a fun season. It is exactly what we aspire every Magic team to be. If no offense to that team, if they had a little bit more talent, we would be, that team would be very, very different. We would talk about a very, very different team. And if a team plays with the effort and energy that those guys played with more talent, that's a special group. That's a special team. To some extent, though, I don't think the idea of Heart and Hustle, the idea of that team, completely disappeared after that season ended. I don't think that team completely disbanded or broke up. There were remnants of that team left when Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill arrived. There was still Darryl Armstrong. There was still Bo Outlaw, the Heart and Hustle part of the Heart and Hustle. There was still, there was still Pat Garrity. There was still several, Andrew DeClark, if we want to include him. There was still Doc Rivers. And so while the team never quite got the pluckiness, the plucky underdoggedness of those early teams, this team still put a lot of pieces together. This team still had that it factor, or this team still had that idea of who it could be. Doc Rivers took a lot of what he learned. He still talks very highly of that Heart and Hustle team. Took a lot of what he learned to his other teams, whether it was the LA Clippers, whether it was the Boston Celtics with the Ubuntu in 2008. Heart and Hustle may have dissipated, but the remnant still remained. That was redundant, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah, I hope you understand what I'm saying. The Magic tried to be Heart and Hustle with a star. And look, they needed more talent. They needed health. They needed smarter management and smarter personnel decisions to meet success. McGrady was individually brilliant. And the Magic obviously fell off a cliff once Darryl and Bo were gone. So the heart of that team was literally ripped out. And in 2004, they hit rock bottom because they just changed too much. And so I think the lesson that I take from that team is how important culture is to a team's ultimate success. Yes, throwing in a Shaq, changes everything. Throwing in a T-Mac changes everything. But at the same time, having a culture, a strong culture that everyone buys into is clearly important to helping a team stay competitive. And if there's one thing we can say about the 2023 Orlando Magic, it's that they are bought in to what their coach is selling. They are bought in to Jamal Mosley and his motivational tactics and the way that he keeps everyone engaged and focused on their big picture and focused on their development and growth. And look, just like Doc Rivers, he has to prove himself as a tactician. He has to prove himself as a game manager, or someone who can make adjustments, who can, pick something out and find the right lever to pull in the playoffs. There's still a lot to work out. No one's kind of denying that. No one's changing that. But the culture is still a really important base for this team to grow from. The Magic finishing the season the way they did, going 29-28 after the 5-20 start, that is a sign of buy-in to me. Yes, there's still a talent deficit. There's still a talent gap. Maybe they filled in a little bit with their offseason moves. Maybe they'll fill in a little bit with experience. Maybe they'll fill in a little bit with Paolo Banchero taking the step into stardom, or Franz Wagner taking the step into stardom, or someone else, or even Markelle Fultz taking a step into stardom. There are ways for this team to grow and develop and kind of fill in some of that. But at the end of the day, what is the basis of this team is this team's belief in each other, the belief in themselves and the belief in each other. And that can clearly go a long way. That can clearly take a team a long, long way. And so for a Magic team that is trying to peek its head above water and peek its head in the playoffs, yes, the star is important. It is. So is crafting this identity. So is crafting this culture that the team can use and lean on to take that next step, to grow in the right direction. And that's where the Magic are really at right now. There's one more team to go over and what elements from the 2006 Orlando Magic teach us about finishing strong and really establishing that culture once again. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. So the path of Dwight Howard's path was not Shaquille O'Neal's path. He wasn't instantly the best player on the team and instantly an overnight sensation in the NBA. That's the truth. It took Dwight a little while, and some of that is he was an 18-year-old. He didn't make the All-Star team until his third or fourth. I think it was his fourth season in the league. The 2007 season was his first year in the All-Star game. We all knew Dwight Howard was something special, but he needed time to grow up a little bit. He wasn't as physically ready for the NBA as you'd expect from a high schooler. And the Magic really narrowed his role and said, hey, focus on rebounding, focus on defending, focus on putbacks. We're not going to go crazy on the offense early on in his career. And maybe that was a mistake. Maybe that wasn't. But Orlando, when they made the Tracy McGrady trade, didn't make a trade to rebuild. They made a trade to reload. They acquired Steve Francis. They acquired Cuttino Mobley. They acquired Kelvin Cato and really, really tried to remain competitive, to stay in the playoffs. They won 36 games in his first season. In the second season, though, it was clear things were kind of falling apart. Steve Francis did not react warmly to the Cuttino Mobley trade. Grant Hill was still in and out of the lineup. I think in 2005, the Magic had a late season injury to Hedo Turkoglu that cost them big, that kind of took them out of playoff contention because there was a late season injury to Grant Hill and Hedo Turkoglu, I think, that took them out of contention. The 2006 season, the Magic were just kind of scuttling around, and it just became very, very clear it was time to turn the keys over to the young kids. And so they moved Francis out of town. They brought in Darko Milicic. They still kind of took a second draft risk on a guy like Milicic. But really the key to that season was they handed the keys over to Jameer Nelson and Dwight Howard. They let those guys run the show. And while Orlando still went 36-46 that season, the season ended on a much brighter note. In fact, I would argue there's a lot of comparisons to be made between the 2006 team and last year's team. They went 17-13 after the All-Star break. Dwight Howard averaged 16.3 points per game and 12.2 rebounds per game during that run. Jameer Nelson averaged 14.6 points per game for the season, upped it to 15.8 points per game and 5.6 assists per game after the All-Star break. During that run, they established themselves as one of the best defensive teams in the league with Brian Hill as the head coach. They really developed who they were going to be. And even though they finished with the same record, they were still in the playoff hunt to the last week of the season. It was a late season Chicago win over Miami on a Sunday before they came to Orlando that officially eliminated them from the playoffs. Orlando, I think, lost their last 2 games to that season. So they could have easily been a 38-win team, which sounds a lot better. Very, very similar to this year's Magic team, where they started off behind the 8 ball. Orlando went 5-20 early, and then they slowly kind of found themselves as a young team and put themselves in a position to maybe sneak into the playoffs if things broke the right way. There's maybe a hole that was too deep to dig themselves out of. That Magic team carved its identity. They were a defensive team. Brian Hill's teams with Orlando were very good defensively. You could kind of see that where this team was going to make its money when they got good. And obviously it was still a few years down the road, and there were a few key injuries and a few key acquisitions made in the meantime. But the idea with under Brian Hill was slow the pace down, work the ball to Dwight, be really good defensively. And that's what the Magic were in those years. And that got them on the doorstep of the playoffs in 2006, and then finally into the playoffs in 2007. I believe Orlando went either 41-41 or 42-40 that season. But everyone pointed to the momentum they built at the end of the 2006 season as the reason they were able to punch their way through. And again, like every young team, it was a journey. It was ups and downs. It was a lot. There's a lot of similarities between those two teams. That team established its identity on defense, just like the 2023 team established its identity on defense, finishing 6th in the league in defensive rating after December 7th, after the 5-20 start, and finishing, I think they were 12th or 13th overall for the season. This Orlando team not only has the culture, they have the star, but they began to establish their way to win, as Steve Clifford often put it, establish their identity and their process to get over the hump, to get victories. And that is just so essential to what the Magic are trying to do. That is just a big piece of this story. The elements of a team that is on the verge of making a long playoff run, at least in Magic history, are all present for this Magic team. We are optimistic about this Magic team because we see the growth. We see the growth potential. We see what they've built. We see what they're becoming. We see what they want to do. We see it all. And this team, indeed, feels like it is on the verge of such a long playoff run, of such a big moment of growth. This is what a team on the precipice of a long playoff run looks like. What we saw last year very much felt like the beginnings of something special. And what we will see this year is hopefully a team that puts all those pieces together. Now, like I said, it is not guaranteed. I'm not sitting here saying the Magic are 100% going to the playoffs. We expect them to be in the postseason. We expect them to be in postseason contention. We expect them to grow from last year. That's what you expect from young teams. You don't want setbacks in a young team's growth, because that's where the problems begin in a rebuild. But every element that we've seen in Magic history that sets up a team for an era, for a successful run, we see that in the 2023 Magic. And we hope to see that again in the 2024 Magic. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at @PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all of the based on Apple Podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device to latest on the Orlando Magic. Be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can follow us on Twitter at OMagicDaily. If you really enjoyed my podcast last week with Fazan Amer, where we dove into the Orlando Magic's playbook, head to my Patreon page, Orlando Magic Hub, to check out a video around noon on Monday, chatting about the basics of the Orlando Magic's offense and defense. Some fun stuff there as I dove into some of the plays that Fazan mentioned in that podcast. If you want to go back and watch it, talk a little bit about what the Magic are trying to do and who the Magic are trying to be. As we start to dive into the playbook, you can check out that. Find the link to my Patreon page on my Twitter bio at PhilipRR_OD. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. On our next episode of Locked On Magic, we're going to the 5 decisions that the Magic face entering next season. So we'll start breaking down some of the things that we'll look forward to in training camp and beyond. But until then, for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.